Most people scroll past. Most people see the title and keep moving. And the ones who stop, the ones who feel something pull in the chest before they even click, those are not random. You stopped because something in you recognized something in this title before your mind had time to explain why. That recognition is not coincidence. It is signal, and the signal is coming from inside a process that has already been happening in you for longer than you realize. There is a state that the quantum field can enter, not as theory, not as metaphor, but as a measurable physical condition where separate parts of a system begin to synchronize, where the chaos of independent oscillations starts to resolve into something ordered, aligned, coherent, where the whole becomes genuinely greater than the sum of its parts in a way that is not poetic, but literal. That state is called quantum coherence, and there are signs that it is activating in a human being. Specific, recognizable, sometimes confusing signs that most people experience without knowing what they are living through. I want to go through those signs today, not as a checklist, as a map of something that is already in motion in you. Because if you saw this title and felt what I think you felt, the process is not approaching. It is already here. Before we go into the signs, I want to say something about what coherence actually is, because the word gets used in ways that strip it of its real weight. In physics, coherence describes the state of a system where its parts maintain a precise and stable relationship with each other over time. Not just proximity, not just connection, synchronized relationship. The kind where the behavior of one part is not independent from the behavior of the others, because they are operating as a unified field rather than as separate components. When coherence is absent, a system is noisy, each part doing its own thing. Energy dispersed, signal weak. The system works, but it works below what it is capable of because the parts are not amplifying each other, they are canceling each other out. When coherence emerges, something different happens. The system starts to behave in ways that seem to exceed what its parts could produce individually. The signal gets stronger, the output gets cleaner, and there is a quality of precision in how the system moves through its environment that was simply not available before. Now apply that to a human being. A person living in incoherence is not broken. They are fragmented, attention going in multiple directions, internal states contradicting each other. What they believe pulling against what they feel pulling against what they do. The energy is there, but it is dispersed across the noise of a system that has not yet found its phase. A person entering coherence starts to consolidate, not because they forced anything, because the field found a frequency that the system could organize around, and once that happens, something in the person starts to function at a level that feels, from the inside, like becoming someone different. It is not becoming someone different. It is becoming more fully what was always there underneath the noise. I think about this a lot, because most of the time when I have felt most like myself, most clear, most aligned, it was not because something good happened from the outside. It was because the internal noise dropped below a certain threshold, and what was underneath it became audible. That is coherence. And it does not announce itself with a dramatic moment. It announces itself with signs. There is a specific profile of experience that appears in someone whose coherence is beginning to activate. Not all at once, not in the same order for everyone, but the pattern is consistent enough that when you lay it out clearly, most people in this process recognize themselves immediately. The first sign is that things that used to consume your energy simply stop landing the same way. Situations that would have pulled you into reaction, arguments that would have cost you days, Noise that would have reorganized your entire internal state start to pass through with less grip. Not because you are suppressing anything, because the signal you are running on has gotten stronger, and the noise has less relative power against it. What used to feel urgent starts to feel optional, and you are not sure yet whether that is wisdom or detachment. It is neither. It is coherence reducing the interference. The second sign is that your relationship with time starts to feel different. There are days where hours pass inside what feels like minutes, not because you are distracted, but because you are absorbed, fully present inside something rather than partially present and partially somewhere else in your head. That quality of presence, where the gap between you and what you are doing closes completely, is a signature of a coherent system. The fragmentation of attention that makes time feel like it is always somewhere other than where you are starts to dissolve. The third sign is that the right things start arriving with less effort than they used to require. Not everything, not in every area, but in specific areas where your internal state has consolidated, where you have stopped fighting what the field was already showing you. Circumstances begin to organize in ways that feel less like coincidence and more like accuracy. Like the field is responding to a frequency you are now running clearly enough for it to read. The fourth sign is the most disorienting one. You start to outgrow things you thought were permanent parts of you. Relationships that felt necessary start to feel complete. Identities you built carefully start to feel like clothes that no longer fit. The version of yourself that needed certain validations, certain dynamics, certain external confirmations to feel stable starts to loosen. And this is uncomfortable before it is liberating, because the coherent self is not the defended self. It is the one underneath the defense. The fifth sign is that you become harder to manipulate and easier to be around simultaneously. When a system is incoherent, it is vulnerable to interference. Anything that resonates with its noise can amplify the noise and redirect the system. When a system is coherent, it has its own stable frequency, and interference that does not match that frequency simply does not find purchase. You become less reactive, not because you have suppressed reactivity, but because the frequency you are running on does not amplify the signals that used to destabilize you. People who genuinely know you feel the solidity. People who relied on your fragmentation feel the change. If you recognize yourself in more than two of these, the process is not starting. It is already underway. This is the question I find most interesting when I think about this process. Why now? Why does coherence activate in certain people at certain moments and not others? What is the catalyst? In my observation, and I am speaking from what I have watched in myself and in people who have gone through this, coherence does not activate because someone decided to become more coherent. It does not respond to intention in that direct way. It activates in the aftermath of fragmentation that went far enough. There is a specific kind of breaking point that is not actually a breaking point. It is a threshold, the moment where the cost of maintaining the fragmented state exceeds what the system is willing to pay, where continuing to disperse energy across the noise becomes more exhausting than the discomfort of consolidating would be. Some people reach that threshold through loss. Something they were organized around disappears, and the reorganization that follows, if they move through it consciously rather than immediately rebuilding the same structure, produces coherence. Some people reach it through a period of radical honesty with themselves, where the gap between what they are living and what they actually are becomes impossible to ignore. And closing that gap, even partially, produces the kind of internal alignment that coherence requires. Some people reach it through something that cannot be fully explained. A moment where something drops away without a clear cause, and what remains is quieter and more stable than what was there before. The mechanism is different each time. The result has the same signature. A system that was operating in fragments begins to operate as a whole. And what becomes possible from that state is not comparable to what was available before. Write in the comments, what was the moment or the period that started this process in you? Not the dramatic version, the honest one. The moment you look back on now and recognize as the threshold, even if it did not feel like one at the time. Here is what most people do not understand about coherence until they are inside it. It does not just change what you experience internally. It changes what the field around you can deliver. A fragmented system produces fragmented output. The signal it sends into the quantum field is noisy, inconsistent, full of interference from the competing frequencies inside it. The field responds to that signal with the same inconsistency, not as punishment, as physics. The field mirrors the coherence of the observer. A coherent system produces a clean signal, stable, sustained, precise, and the field responds to that signal with a different quality of organization. Synchronicities that would have been blocked by the noise of the previous state become possible. Connections that required a frequency you were not yet running reach you. Opportunities that were always present in the field of probability but could not collapse into your experience because your observation was too scattered to select them become specific. This is not manifestation in the way the word is usually used. It is not about wanting something clearly enough that the universe delivers it. It is about the quality of the observer becoming precise enough that the collapse of the quantum field into specific outcomes starts to favor what the observer is actually coherent with rather than what they are fragmented about. The difference between those two things is enormous. What you want and what you are coherent with are often very different. What you want lives in thought. What you are coherent with lives in your actual internal state, in what your attention naturally returns to, in what generates presence rather than effort in you, in what the system is genuinely organized around rather than what it is trying to organize around. The field does not read your intentions. It reads your coherence. I spent a long time not understanding this distinction, trying to want things more clearly, more specifically, more persistently. And the results were inconsistent in a way that felt arbitrary until I understood that the quality of wanting was never the variable. The variable was the coherence of the state that the wanting was coming from. When the state became coherent, the wanting stopped being necessary. The field started delivering what the coherent state was naturally aligned with. Not always what I expected, always more accurate than what I expected. The word in the title that I want to address directly, because it is the one most likely to be misread. Unmatched does not mean superior. It does not mean better than other people in the way competition works. It does not mean you become someone who has defeated others at something. It means something more specific and more interesting than that. When a quantum system achieves coherence, it operates at a level that is simply not accessible to the same system in a fragmented state. Not slightly better, fundamentally different in kind. The coherent state and the incoherent state of the same system are not on the same scale. They are not competing versions of the same output. They are different operating conditions producing outputs that cannot be compared because they are not in the same category. A person who has entered genuine coherence is not competing with who they were before. They have moved outside the frame where that comparison makes sense. That is what unmatched means here. You stop being comparable to earlier versions of yourself, not because you improved, but because the system you are operating from has undergone a phase transition. What was possible before and what is possible now are not on the same spectrum. And the most interesting part of this is that from the inside, it does not feel like becoming extraordinary. It feels the word in the title that I want to address directly, because it is the one most likely to be misread. Unmatched does not mean superior. It does not mean better than other people in the way competition works. It does not mean you become someone who has defeated others at something. It means something more specific and more interesting than that. When a quantum system achieves coherence, it operates at a level that is simply not accessible to the same system in a fragmented state. Not slightly better. Fundamentally different in kind. The coherent state and the incoherent state of the same system are not on the same scale. They are not competing versions of the same output. They are different operating conditions producing outputs that cannot be compared because they are not in the same category. A person who has entered genuine coherence is not competing with who they were before. They have moved outside the frame where that comparison makes sense. That is what unmatched means here. You stop being comparable to earlier versions of yourself, not because you improved, but because the system you are operating from has undergone a phase transition. What was possible before and what is possible now are not on the same spectrum. And the most interesting part of this is that from the inside, it does not feel like becoming extraordinary. It feels like becoming ordinary in a way that is finally accurate. Like the noise that made everything feel harder than it should have been has dropped enough that what remains is simply you, functioning at the level that was always structurally available but never accessible through the fragmentation. The extraordinariness, if that is even the right word, is not something added. It is what was always there underneath the interference. Now let's go to the highlighted comment of the day. I want to share something from the comments on a recent video because it is the most precise description I have seen of what coherence activation looks like from the inside. The timing is impeccable, and thank you. Scarcity loop. And yesterday, I caught it to acknowledge and replace the thought from not deserving to an actual field delivery from earlier that day. Read that again. That is the whole mechanism in one sentence. The scarcity loop is incoherence. The catching is coherence beginning to activate. The replacement is not positive thinking. It is the coherent observer refusing to select the familiar outcome when the field had already shown something different was available. That is not coincidence. That is what happens when the coherence becomes strong enough that you catch the moment of collapse before it closes in the old direction. So keep catching it, because every time you do, the coherent frequency gets stronger and the scarcity loop gets weaker. Not because you are fighting it, because you are no longer feeding it with your observation. That is the practice, and that is the sign that coherence is not approaching, and it is here. Before the last part of this, I have two important things to say. If this video described something you are living right now, something that has a name now that it did not have before you clicked, subscribe to this channel. This is exactly the kind of content I am building here. Not inspiration. Maps, frameworks for what is actually happening when the field is moving in your life.